Hello, everyone, and welcome to Uncivil Law. For today's case, a court in Los Angeles has determined the homeless should no longer be homeless and has ordered them to be homed. This is the case of LA Alliance for Human Rights versus the City of Los Angeles. In this case, there are a group of homeless, and the court has said they should be homed and has ordered them to have homes with nurses and things. So we're going to read this decision from the District Court of California and learn a little bit about California law and predict how it's all going to go horribly, horribly wrong. Let's get started with this. Since this case began on March the 10th, 2020, so this case decision is coming pretty fast. It's only been 2 months and we already have a decision from the trial court. That's a pretty fast decision. The burgeoning pandemic has been a primary concern. This crisis poses a special danger to the vulnerable homeless population. Without adequate access to shelter, hygiene, and sanitation facilities, individuals experiencing homelessness face a greater risk of contracting the novel virus, and an outbreak in the homeless community would threaten the general public as well. Okay, yes, the disease vector of the homeless has been a serious concern to a lot of people, particularly on the right, where we observe the homeless do not have conditions to maintain their health, and the degree to which they're being allowed to live on the streets on downtown LA, and they can become a disease vector for all kinds of diseases. And so they might become a disease vector for this particular disease. Now, there is one mitigating factor for this particular disease, as far as I understand it, and by no means am I a professional in this field, so take what I'm saying now with a grain of salt. But my understanding is that the disease does not spread particularly well in an open air environment, that it doesn't really work except in close contact in a closed environment. And we've seen that somewhat borne out by the numbers that we have in the United States. Something like 40 to 60% of deaths have been from nursing homes, for example, both because they're elderly and because they are a more confined environment. But there doesn't seem to be a lot of evidence at this time for a person-to-person transfer in open air environments outdoors. And since the homeless are outdoors, this particular disease may not be a particular threat to the homeless. So as far as I understand it. But the idea that the homeless in general are disease vectors because they don't maintain serious sanitary conditions, don't have access to showers, don't have access to things to maintain cleanliness. Yes, in general, they are a disease vector. And so the court is saying, yes, they're a disease vector. Okay, that makes sense. In its hearings, status conferences, and settlement negotiations, the court has therefore maintained a particular focus on the public health issues facing the homeless community in the greater Los Angeles area. Yeah, fair enough. If the homeless community becomes disease ridden because they're everywhere, they become a disease vector for the city. So there is a public health interest in the city in regulating the homeless because of the nature of them being able to spread disease. So the idea that the city of Los Angeles could do something about this in terms of regulating or not otherwise is not beyond the pale. The idea of the court doing that, though, is a different situation. As the court has learned from the parties, as well as other participants, it has become clear that many homeless individuals face additional immediate health hazard as a result of camping near freeway overpasses, underpasses, and ramps. These locations pose two dangers. First, they expose individuals to elevated levels of pollutants and contaminants, including lead and other carcinogens, which have deleterious health impacts and can shorten a life expectancy by decades. It's not immediately obvious to me, and perhaps the court explains it somewhere else, why being outdoors would pose a different threat to lead. I would imagine that if anything, your threat to lead would be different indoors. There's a lot of old houses or old things with old paint that might still contain lead, but we've had unleaded gas in the United States forever and a day. So it's not like the being near an underpass is exposing you to lead. It might expose you to other things, but lead I don't particularly see. And again, because it's open air environment, the pollutants that do exist are becoming dispersed. Now, LA in general is more polluted than others, so there's that factor. But the idea that you're more exposed from the pollutants by being under an underpass isn't immediately obvious to me that would be true. Second, these locations also increase the danger that a homeless person will be struck by a vehicle or injured in the event of an earthquake or crash. I suppose that is true to some degree. Most of the encampments I've seen are well enough back that the likelihood of being hit by a car is somewhat reduced, but I suppose it's more possible under a highway underpass than somewhere else. Okay. To protect those individuals who experience homelessness living near these freeway overpasses, underpasses, and ramps, the court hereby issues a preliminary injunction requiring they be relocated away from such areas. So the court wants to take away the home they have from these underpasses that provide them some shelter. It's relatively dry. Because it's a protection from the rain and some of the problems. It's it's an option that a lot of people take advantage of, and they want them to be relocated away from there. But that's okay. The court is just going to order that they be provided housing. From where? I don't know, but from nowhere, apparently. Okay. The California Welfare and Institutions Code provides as follows. Every county and every city and county shall relieve and support all incompetent, poor, indigent persons, and those incapacitated by age, disease, or accident, lawfully resident therein, when such persons are not supported and relieved by their relatives or friends, by their own means, or state hospitals, or other state or private institutions, citing a relevant piece of law. So there is some law that says the county shall provide aid to these people. What is the nature of that aid is not well specified here. This is a little generalized to get any specific right out of, at least to my mind, but there's something in California that says the county is supposed to support the poor, which arguably they do. This generalized provision doesn't require them to do anything particular, but arguably the county services do provide for the poor and do provide for the homeless, not by providing them homes, but there are other aids that are available to people in these situations. Now, whether or not those aids are sufficient is a whole other can of worms, but the idea that they are not in compliance with this law is not immediately obvious to me. This provision is intended to provide for the protection, care, and assistance to the people of the state in need thereof, and to promote the welfare and happiness of all the people of the state by providing appropriate aid and services to all the need and distressed. Such aid and services shall be provided promptly and humanely, with due regard for preservation of life and on a non-discriminatory basis. Okay. There is at least a serious question as to whether the City of Los Angeles and County of Los Angeles have failed to meet these obligations under California law. All right. By providing inadequate housing, such individuals experience homelessness, must shelter in inherently dangerous locations. The City of Los Angeles and County of Los Angeles may have also exposed residents living near these freeways to a public nuisance. So this generalized provision in California law, the court is reading as requiring providing of homes, which the language didn't provide. It just provides a very sort of generalized statement of the county has an obligation to provide for those who can't provide for themselves. In what way is completely unclear from this generic language. But from this generic language, the court apparently is concluding this includes the right to a home. So that means that California, or the City of Los Angeles and County of Los Angeles, now have an affirmative obligation to provide everyone a home. Given the health hazards described above, the court has no difficulty finding a grave risk of irreparable harm. When homeless individuals are exposed to these dangers, hazardous waste concentrations of lead, they keep saying that. I'm not sure why. Why are there concentrations of lead? Where are these concentrations of lead coming from? It's okay. Car crashes and the potential collapse of an overpass in an earthquake. Okay. Their health is threatened in a way that monetary damages cannot adequately compensate. So there's a risk of irreparable harm, but the irreparable harm in question is coming from not from anyone doing anything. It's coming from them not doing things. So the irreparable harm that is occurring is as a result of people not doing stuff. And not doing stuff is typically what the default rule in our structure is. The government is typically not required to do stuff. And even this generalized language the court refers to is not a specific guarantee as far as I can tell. It's very generalized language that they have an obligation to provide. How doesn't really say, but they do. So as long as they're doing something along those lines, they seem to be in compliance with the law. So as long as there's homeless shelters and rehab clinics of some variety and some sort of job training, some sort of food support, some sort of aid that's available. As long as available on a general basis, then as far as I would be able to tell, they're in compliance with the law. But no, according to this court, there is irreparable harm because they don't have homes. But the government isn't denying them homes; they just don't have homes. But we're going to fix that by giving them homes. So even though the city is not the one creating the harm, the city is the one responsible for fixing the harm. That seems very odd. Normally in law, when someone causes a harm, they're the one responsible for fixing it. If someone isn't responsible for causing the harm, they don't have to fix it. So the city didn't create the harm. They didn't require these people to live there. They didn't require them to do anything. The city's not mandating this. So the city's not creating the harm. Yet, even though the city's not responsible for the harm, they're responsible for fixing it. That's not normally how we do these things in law. No. As we've already discussed, the homeless individuals who live near these freeway overpasses, underpasses, and ramps face severe health hazards. By comparison, the city of Los Angeles and county would only need to, I love how the court is so dismissive here, would only need to invest relatively modest financial and administrative resources. Really, only need to invest modest financial and administrative resources. Really. To house the homeless. Modest. Sure, because I'm sure that you're in no way going to require these homes to not meet some minimum standards that you're going to impose, and they're going to be relatively expensive as a result. So yeah, relatively modest. I love how the court is being very dismissive here. Wow. Relatively modest administrative resources to provide these health safeties to individuals. Yes, because Los Angeles is famous for people being able to build things without there being massive problems and massive red tape. So Los Angeles is famous that you could just build new homeless shelters and no one would object, and it wouldn't get drowned in red tape, and it wouldn't cost a fortune because of all the people lobbying for it and making sure it's done exactly the right way, and also so forth and so on. Yeah, the city should have absolutely no problem putting up housing for all this and administering all this and making sure that it's done. I can't foresee any issues in Los Angeles with this on just a modicum of money. It's barely an inconvenience, right? Yeah, Lord. Finally, a humane relocation from the freeways and support of public health will promote the public interest by putting an increased burden on the city to build, develop, maintain these things in an environment that is not exactly open to that. Yes. Therefore, to protect the homeless individuals camping near the freeway overpasses, underpasses, and ramps, and the general public, the court hereby orders these individuals be humanely relocated away from these areas. As part of this humane relocation effort and to promote the underlying public health and safety goals, the City of Los Angeles and County of Los Angeles shall provide shelter or alternative housing options, such as safe parking sites or hotel and motel rooms, contracted under Project Room K to individuals experiencing homelessness. I want to know if I can get one of these places, because I want to know if I can stop paying rent. That would be good. Although I'd have to live in LA, so I don't know. Maybe it's not that great. So what about these conditions? What do they have to do? Here's what they have to do. All these shelters and alternative housing options must be configured with adequate space to allow these individuals to maintain minimum recommended distance of 6 feet. So we have to make sure that people are 6 feet away at all times. We have to build really big places for them to live in. All shelters and housing options must have hygiene facilities, such as hand washing stations and showers. All shelters and alternative housing options must have nursing staff, who upon intake can test each homeless individual for communicable diseases and other health conditions. So they have to be provided with nurses. I don't have to be provided with nurses. The state isn't providing me a nurse, to check into my health, but the homeless get a nurse to check into their health. So by mandate from the court. Wow. All shelters and alternative housing options must be staffed by security as necessary to secure the safety. So they get round-the-clock security at their homes, paid for by the government. So, okay, that's a thing that we're doing. There has to have security there, staff security. Almost all homeless individuals shall be able to retain possession of their belongings, whether they choose to enter a shelter or homeless options or simply relocate a sufficient distance away from these underpasses and ramps. Note here that it in no way prevents them from bringing anything. It says it shall retain all their possessions, all of them. So even if they're mold infested or disease infected possessions, they're allowed to maintain them and presumably bring them into these environments. So that's concerning. So yes, they can maintain their possessions even if they're derelict because the court's opinion doesn't seem to allow for an alternative. So the homeless can maintain all their possessions no matter what state they're in these facilities that we're going to be creating, where we're going to bring people under one door. That's a little concerning. Before beginning the process of clearing these underpasses, overpasses, and ramps, all individuals must be given advance notice and shall be informed about the nearby shelters and alternative housing options. After such notice is given, after the City of Los Angeles or County of Los Angeles has provided adequate shelter for individuals experiencing homelessness, the City of Los Angeles and County will be allowed to enforce anti-camping laws in the vicinity of the freeways to ensure these individuals are moved to a safer location. That is, while an individual experiencing homeless could not be ordered to a shelter facility, they could be ordered to relocate to an adequate distance away. If all the above requirements are met, then the freeway adjacent areas will be fully compliant with prior law. Although the court finds these health risks described constitute an emergency and demand a swift response, the court invites parties' input before this injunction takes effect. But the injunction takes force on effect at 12 noon on the 22nd. So this upcoming Friday. So they have an entire week to figure out how to comply with this. I'm sure the city of LA is thrilled. Thus, that brings us to the end of the current coverage of the case of LA Alliance for Human Rights and others versus the city of Los Angeles and others. In this case, we learned that the homeless are under freeway ramps, as is typical, because it provides pretty decent shelter from rain and thunder and from wind and conditions, and this a place where a lot of homeless people live. And the court here is saying, because of the current situation, we need to provide them all homes, and we need to do it by this upcoming Friday. I'm not sure where the city of Los Angeles is supposed to find housing for all these people by this upcoming Friday. I mean, presumably the shelters that already exist and already are being held to capacity. So I'm not sure where they're supposed to gain this capacity, but apparently that's something that the city of Los Angeles is supposed to figure out by this upcoming Friday. So good luck with that. And we are going to mandate that they be provided with nurses and security and allowed to keep their stuff, even if it's disease ridden. But that's the end of our current coverage of this case.